Hello, my name is Mate, and you have tuned in to the inbetweeners checkup. I am here this evening with Amanda Loftus, who I had the pleasure of working with some years ago. We actually joined a business OCG at the same time and did training together, and I had an opportunity to learn a bit more about her. And while we've both moved on from that organisation and our paths have kind of taken different directions, at this time we find ourselves sort of coming together to have a bit of a chat with Amanda about her situation, what she's been up to over the last little bit, and hopefully for those listening, they can take something away from this and apply it to their own lives. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Amanda, and you can tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Mate. So my name's Amanda. I work as a contractor, actually. So I was in recruitment for many years and worked with Mate and a bunch of other amazing consultants. And I actually moved out of that field and went into HR and sort of risk management. And now I'm a consultant contractor working in the change management, business architecture, org design space, which is sort of quite left field from starting off in recruitment. And yeah, I've lived in Auckland for quite a number of years and moved to Wellington. I have a daughter who's 14, a teenager, so that's keeps me pretty busy. And unfortunately, about almost a year ago, my husband actually passed away from cancer. So I've been through quite a massive journey with that and changing and adapting to my new life. And, supporting someone with a terminal illness is just such a amazing journey to go through, and it's, boy, is it tough. So the people that do that are just absolutely incredible, and the people that support you. So hopefully today I can talk a little bit sort of about both of those things. Yeah.
So I guess if we sort of look back at that whole situation, when was it that your husband was first diagnosed?
2016, it was April, towards the end of April. So he had actually, on reflection, across a number of years, he'd been really unwell, and we sort of never could put our finger on it. It was a really strange sort of situation. And what happened was he went to the doctors with a cold and came out with a really, really rare cancer. And within 2 weeks of his diagnosis, he had to have quite a major operation where they removed a tumour. So he had a cancer called synovial sarcoma, which only 2% or less than 2% of the population of the world gets. So it's a very rare and difficult cancer to treat. So initially they thought it was treatable, so that was great. So he actually had 2 ribs removed, can you believe, which he had a massive scar from like one side to the other. We used to call it the shark attack scar. So anytime he had an opportunity to show anybody, he would, which was hilarious. But it was just really invasive. And the tumour was like the size of a cricket ball, so massive, and it had been growing under his rib. So yeah, that was pretty major. And then from there, he started chemotherapy, which was really tough. And he did that twice, actually, with a small remission in between. And then you get to the stage where, they tell you that it's terminal and nothing can be done. And that's really, really tough. That's a really tough conversation to have. Yeah.
And I guess, look, I mean, there's obviously that situation that's going on there for yourself, but at the same time, you've got a young daughter there who you're potentially trying to manage through that process as well. How did you go about that, if I may ask?
Yeah, sure. So I guess everyone has a different parenting style, right? So Mike and I, because Ella's our only child, we were sort of like the 3 musketeers. So we were really open with her about everything, and sort of kept her informed on each part of the stage. She used to come in and to the hospital when Mike had treatment sometimes or appointments. We never used to take her to everything. But we took her to show her where he had chemo, and we got her involved in the journey. She helped shave his head you know, to take his hair off and things like that, because it was really painful for her.
Yeah.
I guess for us, we didn't want to get to the point where if he was terminal, which is where he ended up, unfortunately, that it was a really big shock to her.
Yeah.
So I guess from my professional experience, preparing lots of people, I've helped mentor many people and guide people through massive life changes. And the way that I always did it was just giving them a little bit of information at a time to get them prepared. And that really worked for Ella. The other thing was trying to keep everything as normal as possible at home and, you know, stick to a routine, still do sleepovers, you know, have parties. There were some things that Dad couldn't do because he was sick, but generally speaking, we just adapted our lives to make everything work.
Yeah.
And that really helped her. But it was really tough for her. I've got to say her school and the principal and all of her teachers were absolutely amazing. And so, to be really fair, it takes a village. It really is just not like one person that helps like a child get through it. It's so many people. Yeah. So if anyone's watching this who has supported us, thank you so much. It's really special. She's been on a slightly different grief journey to me, and it's taken a little bit longer maybe for her to realise he's not coming back. So it started to hit her probably in the last 3 or 4 months more, actually. And so she's been going to a school counsellor, which has been great to help with that. And she goes to a Catholic school, so that the care that they have there is pretty fantastic, actually, I've got to say. She has had some very tough moments, actually. And I think for me, as the parent that's left here, it's very tough as well, because you can't take the place of the parent that's passed. And so I've had to have those conversations with her and go, I'm really sorry. I wish your dad was here, but he's not, and I can't replace that. And kind of like help her work through her own grief and then get her separate support for that. Because there's going to be times in her life when she's an adult that I'm not going to be around to solve things for her. So she really needs to build that toolkit herself around, you know, she's very resilient, but it's just working through those emotional times where she gets really overwhelmed by it. And I found that as a teenager too, you know, it's a pretty turbulent time to go through in your life anyway, right? Hormonal, all these things going on. You know, starting college and learning a whole lot of new things. I found that when she gets quite stressed, the grief gets triggered at that point. So it's a little bit like having a glass that's full. And so her glass is half full a lot of the time. When she gets stressed out, it becomes full. And then that's when the grief really hits her, when she gets tired and when she gets really stressed. So I've started to like really look out for those signs and make sure that I talk to her about how she's feeling, because, you know, kids sometimes are not very self-aware and they don't understand that their behaviours or, you know, the things that they're saying or the things that they're thinking are because of something. You know, they just act. So it's about teaching her about self-awareness.
And that's awesome. And look, I mean, obviously we can talk about the support that you've given your child and those around you. I guess what sort of support was available to yourself?
Yeah, that's quite fascinating, actually. So I've talked to a few people about this. So we were actually in the private system to start with, because we had medical insurance with Southern Cross. So so Mike's surgery and everything like that was all private. So it wasn't through a hospital. And when you go through the public system, you're pretty much assigned, you know, a social worker, a case manager, in a lot of cases, and, you know, contact at the Cancer Society. And you get all these amazing things, you know, provided to you. And we really didn't get a lot of that until we got to the palliative care stage, which is when somebody has a terminal diagnosis. And when we got to that stage, we had, you know, like doctors coming around all the time. We had district nurses visiting. Mike used to get free parking at the hospital through the Cancer Society. I actually did a lot of it myself, and the reason for that was, even though Mike was terminally ill, he wasn't as sick as some other people.
Yeah.
When he was having his treatment, he was still highly functioning. He wouldn't be for about a week, and then 2 weeks he'd be great. And so that was a 3-week cycle. And then when he was out of chemo, he was actually pretty fit and healthy. Part of his treatment plan was to go to the gym. So yeah, I didn't need a lot of help, but I had a lot of offers, which was amazing. And I felt so grateful for that. And I thought, no, I'm going to save these offers until I really, really need them, So yeah, but there's a lot available, I think, if you contact through hospitals, through hospices, through Cancer Society, places like that. There's, you can get cleaning, you can get cooking. One thing that's super amazing is actually hooking into an occupational therapist.
Okay.
A lot of people don't really sort of consider that. But I tell you what, it makes life so much easier. They can come to your house and look at, like how things are set up.
Mm-hmm.
They look at ways to conserve energy for their patients. So, it's just incredible. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's great. And in terms of, I guess, dealing with, I'm going to say, the mental stress of the situation, was there much in the way of support there?
There always is. So you can get counselling and support through places like the Cancer Society or palliative care teams, or through the hospital. We had medical insurance, so we qualified for it privately as well.
Yep.
So Mike would go and see a psychologist quite regularly, sort of like, once a month or something like that, especially for the first year, because he was sick for or diagnosed for 2.5 years before he passed away. So that's quite a long time to sort of know that you're on the journey to not being here.
Yeah.
And also with all the medications and things like that, like the first round of chemo, one of the side effects was almost like clinical depression, and he had been suicidal and things like that. And because I was at work, I had no idea. So yeah, that was quite a shock actually, and quite hard to deal with, but there was like always a lot of people to talk to. I spent actually a lot of time talking to Mike's oncologist, Anne. She was really awesome, and it's kind of amazing that when you're in that sort of terminal illness stage, you're surrounded by so many beautiful people at the hospital that do this for everybody. So you've got, chemotherapy nurses, and the palliative care team's amazing. You have the hospice people, and then you have your oncologist, and your oncologist becomes kind of like your family. So, they always make time for you, and that really helped me because I had a lot of questions and things that I wanted to ask, like when Mike wasn't around either, just so I kind of knew what to prepare for. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess coming up to that time where his condition deteriorated, how to describe this? I guess, look, to be perfectly honest, I haven't had someone close to me in that situation, so it's very difficult for me to try and put myself in your shoes and really consider what it was you were considering. I guess, how are you feeling during that time?
It's like being a hamster on a treadmill. That's exactly how it becomes actually. Like towards and I can reflect on things now, retrospectively, and look at how I was at the time, because now I'm in a different place. At the time, if you'd asked me, I would have thought that I was 100% fine and everything was okay. And I'd only cried twice that week, that's a good week, But towards the end, like watching someone that you love, like really love hard, your big love, just completely deteriorate physically, and watching them suffer is horrendous. It is the most human thing that you can ever see. And, you know, I feel just so privileged to be able to be there to support him through that.
Mm.
You give away a lot of yourself during that process, because you really have to become selfless, because it's not about you, it's about you supporting them to move on.
Yeah.
And that's how I approached it. I think everybody has a different experience, and there's no right way and there's no wrong way to do it. But how I did it was, right, well, I know he's going to die. I just have to do every single thing that I can to help him tick off his bucket list. You know, do all the stuff with us that he wanted to do, create some memories together as a family before he transitioned. And, you know, leading up to it, he was in and out of hospital a lot more. So what happens is their health starts, well, Mike's health started to decline really rapidly in a very short space of time. So he had, his cancer had metastasized to his lungs. He ended up with a collapsed lung and bleeding and a whole lot of things which I won't go into, but it's quite traumatizing because you see a lot of horrible physical things, you know, and you're not really trained probably to psychologically deal with that stuff. But you just keep going. And so by the time he passed away, I was so tired. I didn't even know what day of the week it was, and I was still working, still parenting. I was, you know, contacting friends and family to keep them in the loop with everything that was going on. I was catching up with people that were coming down to Wellington. As you know, like most of our friends are in Auckland. I was running around getting things that Mike needed. When he died and they told me, because you know what, I wasn't even there, which is terrible. And I know it's not something to laugh about, but it's so ironic after being there for everything, and then I wasn't there when he died. I was in the hospital, but they wouldn't let me see him because his condition had deteriorated so rapidly overnight, and they weren't really expecting that. And so they went to give him some extra medication and said, you know, you go and take, you know, your family and stuff for a coffee or breakfast or whatever, and come back. And just as we got back, he died. And I actually just felt like my whole physical body, I just felt like I was overwhelmed with happiness for him, that he didn't have to suffer and struggle with it anymore. And and it's quite weird, like you sort of try and prepare yourself for that moment, and you wonder what's going to happen and how you're going to be, but actually people are a lot stronger than what they think. And that's something that I can say on reflection. You know, I really didn't know what was going to happen. I thought I might pass out or I don't know, you know, but it's a really weird thing.
Wow, okay. And look, I mean, you talk about during that period, you gave so much of yourself to that situation. When, I guess, how long after he passed were you able to start looking at giving some time to yourself?
Yeah, probably a few months afterwards. So the first 2 weeks you actually go into shock, which is not something that's widely talked about actually. So grief is one thing, but the shock of somebody passing away is another thing. And that is basically like a brain fog that lasts for a couple of weeks, and you go to a really dark place. It's not really fun at all. And anyone who's been through this, who's watching, will totally understand what I mean. And, you know, I was very lucky. I was surrounded by beautiful friends and family that helped pick that stuff up, you know, for me. They made sure that I was organised. They came around and cleaned my house and, you know, helped, you know, get me ready for the funeral. And, you know, we had a barbecue the next day, so they all came around and did that stuff. After that, so after about 3 or 4 days after the funeral, Ella and I actually went away back to Hawke's Bay, which is where I'm from Napier, to spend some time with our family, like my family.
Yes.
And the reason that I wanted to do that was to try and sort of remember who I was and who I was before I got married and before I became a serious grown-up. And I wanted to go past my school, and I wanted to look at where I used to ride my bike and, do my paper run and all that kind of stuff. And it actually really helped me. It grounded me. And in our family, we call it going back to your bones. That's what we do. So whenever a major life event happens like that, we go back to our bones to remember where we're from, and then we rebuild from there. And so that's what we did. It was actually also nice being in a different space where people didn't know that your husband had just died as well,
Yes.
because you're kind of surrounded by that for quite a long time. So it's when they're sick and, oh, sorry, your husband's sick and he's got cancer. That's terrible. How are you doing? Which is, it's so lovely that people ask you that. When they die, sometimes you just want to have a break from that for a bit.
Yeah.
And try and be in a bit of a different space. And then from there, I actually went back to work. Probably within 4 weeks, I was back at work, working relatively full-time again. Ella was back at school, and both of us had a discussion about it and decided that for us, being back in a routine was a good thing.
Yeah.
And we both had a lot of support in those environments as well. So sitting at home for me, and I'm sure you'll agree if you've ever been in this position, it's not like the nicest thing sometimes. Like, it's really great for a couple of weeks. It's a bit like COVID. If you can imagine COVID, everybody was like thinking, wow, this could be cool for a few weeks. And then when it drags on, longer and longer and longer, you can kind of sit in your own head for a little bit too long. And so I found going back to work quite healing for me, and they're like my second family at work. So I contract for the military actually. So I have a lot of support, there, and Ella did at school. And then apart from that, it's been a gradual thing. So I sort of had a bit of a experience where all of a sudden one day I woke up and I was just like, far out. I've got my whole life ahead of me. I don't know what I'm doing. I've got a huge house. Do I want to be in Wellington? All these things just snowballed on top of me when I woke up one day, and I had to really think back to what my coping strategies were when Mike was sick. And a lot of that was, taking each day by day, hour by hour, like not trying to think too far ahead because it gets really overwhelming. Yeah. So yeah, just doing that sort of thing has really helped.
Yeah.
And planning small goals for yourself.
Yeah. Okay. And look, I mean, you talked about, I guess, dealing with the shock of the experience, and you talked about grief being a separate situation unto itself. Can you talk to me a little bit around your process there?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of grief is different for every person and every situation. It's not ever the same. There's similarities which, people talk about in the cycles of grief. So, people feel anger, or they feel, all these different emotions, but they don't feel them at the same time in the same order as other people. It's a little bit like a washing machine with a mixed load. It's pretty much like that. Everything's sort of thrown in, so you don't really know what's going to come up. But it's really helpful, I guess, understanding those different cycles to see it in yourself, recognize it in yourself, and recognize when you're struggling with something that you can't move forward from, where you might need help. So grief for me, because Mike had been sick for a long time, I was comfortable with letting him pass over and go, because I didn't want him to stay here being how he was, because it's not a life for anyone. So for me, I woke up and I thought, I've lost everything, my future, all the plans that we'd made. The grief was the grief of losing my future and myself. You sort of wonder if someone will ever love you as much in the future, which sounds like the weirdest thing, but when you have been loved by somebody, you sort of, is this it? The rest of my life's pretty much over now, so what am I going to do? And I made a conscious choice that, especially having a young teenage daughter, that it's really important to talk about your grief and understand it. I also wanted to be a really good role model for her, because I didn't want her to think later in her life, if this happens to her, or it happens to one of my friends or someone that I know, that they'll just see me fall apart and, not work on myself and not fight for my own future. I wanted to show people that there's another way to do this. And the grief thing is something that you carry with you all the time. It becomes part of who you are. I call it mastering the art of the happy sad. So, you can be you can be happy. So my baseline actually as a person is quite happy. I don't know if you remember that from us.
I remember you're always positive. Yeah, even when things weren't going so well, there was still a light or a silver side, shining light.
Yeah. I guess so. And so that's just my default personality. So I'm always like that. And then I'd get these, shadows of sadness that come along. And so instead of fighting them, I just embraced them and thought, I am a happy person, but I'm actually okay to feel sad. I'm okay to feel sorry for myself and everything I've lost, but the key for me was to not feel sorry for myself for too long. Don't be sad for too long. Choose a time to do that and embrace it. I went through many boxes of tissues. I know I look very brave now, but I have cried my little heart out at times and, felt really sad for myself. But being happy and being just sort of like connecting with who you are naturally, your grief doesn't necessarily have to overtake that. And in time, it gets easier. So, time does heal.
Yeah.
So some other things that I did was, so Ella and I went to quite a few concerts and events and things like that, and Mike and I booked them before he passed away. And what that allowed us to do was, even though he wasn't here, we could take somebody with us that had really supported us through everything. And so that's what we did. We went to Queen, and we went to Michael Bublé, and we went to the Beatles.
Awesome.
Show. We've done heaps of things, and I really didn't on the night feel like going, but I'm so glad I did, because what it did was it made me forget about everything, like for an hour or an hour and a half, or in particular Queen, because Mike absolutely loved Queen. It made us really think of him and that he was there with us, and it was such a cool thing to do. And so we started to build experiences and new experiences with other people and new memories, and Mike was really there along with us. I totally believe that. And that's really helped as well. Yeah.
Have you got much planned to sort of, I guess, 1 year anniversary as such?
Yeah, we have actually. So one of the wishes that Mike had was he wanted his ashes turned into a diamond.
Okay.
And that's going to be made into a necklace, a pendant for Ella to wear.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool. And so what he didn't realise is that there's a lot of ashes left over. And so we only need like this much, right, to make this diamond and to have a few backup diamonds. So we are scattering his ashes around the south coast in Wellington, and he always wanted to drive in an Aston Martin. That was his dream. Aston Martin was like his James Bond fantasy, I think.
Yeah.
And before he passed away, it was on his bucket list. Sorry, that was the one thing he didn't do.
Yeah.
He booked it for Ella and I to do with him, and he died before he could do it. So we are going to get one, and we're going to drive his ashes around to the south coast, and we're going to put them in the sea, which will be beautiful.
That is very cool.
And then we're also going to go to the driving range, because that's the one thing Mike taught Ella and I both to play golf.
Okay.
So we go. So that's how we stay connected with him. I take Ella to the driving range, and we hit balls. There you go.
It's cool. I mean, you talked about those times on reflection where, I guess, you were in it as such, and the tissues were mounting up and such. Like, what sort of things were you able to do to help bring you out of that space? Or was it just letting it run its course?
Well, no, actually, I I don't know. I think that's different for a lot of people, and you'll probably hear me say that over and over through our whole conversation. But for me, so Mike died at the end of August, and then I went back to work for a few months, and then as a contractor, we sort of knock off mid-December and don't go back until mid-January, towards the end of January. I always knew that was going to happen, so I kind of allowed myself to be present to go through a lot of my really deep grief at that stage, where I actually had the time and the space to do it. You know, with the jobs that we have been doing for years, you probably remember, like, we can compartmentalize things quite well, actually. And so that's sort of what I did. I sort of, you know, I would take it out of its box a little bit. And then over that period of time, I really took it out of its box. And I remember I sort of cried, I think, every night for 2 weeks. And I was just so sad that Mike wasn't coming back. You know, again, like that we weren't going to do the things that Ella had lost her dad and, you know, all these things. And I remember thinking after 2 weeks, for goodness sake, I cannot keep doing this. You know, Mike wouldn't want me to be like this. He does it. He knows I'm not a sad person. And he said to me before he passed away, you know, be sad for a little bit, Mans, but don't be sad forever. You know, you're going to kick ass and you're going to be great, but you know. And so that's what I sort of reflected on, actually, was that conversation. And from there, I actually thought to myself, right, well, what am I going to do now? And that's when I started moving forward a little bit and started planning smaller goals. And I sort of said to myself, right, I don't want to go back into this place again. This is really horrible and yuck. So I think it's something that you have to work at. That's what I would say.
Awesome. So I guess, what are you doing for yourself in the future at this time?
So what am I doing for myself? So probably about, at the beginning of COVID, actually, or before that, I came up with a concept for myself called the Year of Me and the Year of Fun. So what that was all about was me getting into some activities and things that I've always wanted to do, and planning those. And then sort of COVID came along and squashed a lot of that stuff, unfortunately. And not just for me, but for the whole planet. So I started doing exercise, actually, quite a bit of exercise, and getting back into being fit again, because, you know, that was one of the things that I wasn't able to do. Running a house, you know, looking after us, you know, caring for a sick husband and a teenager and animals and everything like that. So I've been doing that. And Ella and I have been making some travel plans for the future, which is awesome. And, you know, bits and pieces. And I'm also embarking on starting up a business at the moment, which will be focused on supporting widows to help them move forward in their life. So that's really exciting.
Awesome. That's cool. So can you tell me a little bit more about that venture, or is it sort of too early at this stage, a bit hush hush?
So we're sort of in the planning part of it. So I guess just a quick little rundown is, so I'm going to be taking all of the experience that I have working with people for like 18 years, and all of the change qualifications and experience that I've got as well, and working on developing up some programs that will help women move forward, which is awesome. I'm super excited about it. So I really think that this sort of stuff will make a difference for people. It's all about improving your confidence. It's helping you sort of get on top of life admin. You know, like after someone passes away, there's a lot of processes that you have to go through. And to have support to do that is awesome. You know, a lot of women struggle with, you know, giving away their partner's clothing, or selling their house, or, you know, understanding their finances or legal processes, that sort of thing. But then there's also, you know, you just lose so much self-confidence overnight because you're used to having that person next to you. And you'll probably think about that in your marriage too. You know, if you didn't have your wife, it would be so hard, wouldn't it, sometimes to make decisions, and you sort of second guess yourself. Well, the programs that we're designing will really help people have confidence in themselves, and they'll rediscover themselves. They'll find a new purpose, and they will start moving forward, which is really awesome. So we're looking at launching sort of early September. So you'll have to watch this space, basically.
Awesome. Well, it sounds great. And listen, man, I think it's amazing that you've taken something that is a real tragedy for like anyone to experience, and turn that into a situation not only to help yourself, but others who potentially are going through or are going to be going through that in the future. So I commend you on that. And listen, I do thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been really great listening to your experience, and I think, look, grief is a difficult one. There's a lot of emotion involved, and look, it could be a loss of someone through I guess a long-term illness. It could be a sudden loss, even divorce and separation in those ways. I mean, still a grieving process exists, and I think there are aspects that you discussed tonight that people can apply no matter what form of grief you're going through. And yes, everyone has to go through it their own way, and there'll be different experiences that they take on at different times, but there's certainly some underlying principles in terms of that expression and having that support network around you that remain there regardless. So yeah, it's all I can say is thank you, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavours, because I know you have an opportunity to help a lot of other people. So cheers.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
You're most welcome.